Dillon Gabriel is the key to Oregon beating Ohio State, and not just for the reason you think.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200, which is great. In bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Three biggest keys to beating the Buckeyes. Those are coming up later on. And there's just one more thing on the line. Maybe, depending on how another game goes. But Dillon Gabriel has thrown 3 interceptions inside the 5-yard line in the last 2 games. That's not going to cut it. Now, that's not the only reason I think he's the most singularly important player in this football game. The second reason, in addition to the obvious one of Ohio State's defense is crazy good, and Ohio State as a team is really good, and you cannot afford to throw away scoring opportunities, go down the field, and come away with 0 points. And if I were advising Dan Lanning, I'd say if you go down the field, you get in the red zone, you get stopped on 3rd down, kick field goal. Kick field goal if it's within range. Got to be able to get points on the board. I don't think a lot of points are going to be scored in this game. But the second reason that Dillon Gabriel holds the keys is you cannot be one-dimensional against this Ohio State defense. And I don't think I've talked about that enough this week. The Ohio State defense is allowing 62 yards per game on the ground this year and 135 through the air. Now, has Ohio State faced an offense the caliber of Oregon's? No, they most certainly have not. Iowa's offense is improved. It is still mostly dreadful with Cade McNamara at quarterback. However, put the shoe on the other foot, Oregon fans out there. If the Ducks had played vastly inferior competition, even conference teams that you should beat by a lot, how would you want those numbers to look? How would you want the defense to be playing against that level of competition? And I don't think you have to make a mental hop, skip, and a jump that far, because I got news for you. UCLA might be a 1-11 football team at the end of the year. Michigan State has won 3 games. I don't think they're going to reach 6. Neither one of those squads. Now, Oregon State's a pretty good team, playing mostly teams out of the Mountain West. They did beat Purdue, though that doesn't look to be too big of a feat because the Boilermakers are, ooh boy, that's Oregon's next opponent, by the way, and Purdue is not good. They have fired their offensive coordinator. They're getting beat badly left, right, and center and all over the field and whatnot, but more on that next week. So against a defense of this caliber for Ohio State, you've got to be able to have at least some semblance of balance. It doesn't have to be a 350 to 400 yard day for Dillon Gabriel. It doesn't have to be a 200 to 250 yard day for Jordan James, because it's not going to be. Last time these two teams played, CJ Friedel ran wild, right? Oregon wins the game 35-28. The Ohio State defense was much worse then than it is now. I don't think this Buckeyes offense is as prolific as what that team had, because they had Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Chris Olave, I believe, were the receiving corps at the time. Pretty darn good with C.J. Stroud at quarterback. And Jeremiah Smith, really good. Emeka Egbuka, quite good as well. Probably the best number 2 receiver in all of college football, would be the number 1 on plenty of teams in the country, Big Ten or otherwise. And then they've got some other pieces, like the running backs are really good. Will Howard, capable quarterback, having his best career season or best season of his career so far. It's not that level of offense. But this defense, I think, has improved for Ohio State since then more than the offense has taken a step back. Because if you look at the numbers the offense is putting up, it's still really good. It's still really good, and they can run the football. But this Ohio State defense has been very good. They've got NFL players all over the field. Their defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, I think has been really, really good since getting to Columbus. He came over from Oklahoma State, and by the way, he left something behind that is, shall we say, not as good as it once was on the defensive side of the ball. And that's always a good measure of how valuable a coach or a player is. What do you leave behind? Dillon Gabriel, for instance. Look at what he left behind Oklahoma. They can't figure out who their quarterback is. They've already moved on from Jackson Arnold, and they're going to Michael Hawkins. What does that show you? that Dillon Gabriel had a lot of value and won a big game last year against Texas and has been in these sorts of spots before. So too has Will Howard. I expect the Autzen crowd to be fantastic. Maybe the biggest in the history of the stadium. It is going to be phenomenally loud. The stakes are huge. Fans are all riled up. It's going to be great. It's not going to have the same level of impact it might against a younger quarterback like Aiden Childs, who was clearly rattled last week. Will Howard has played a lot of college football. He's won a Big 12 championship. He's played in hostile road environments before. I expect him to look like Will Howard, and how well he plays is going to depend on how disruptive that Oregon front four is able to be. They've been exceptional this year, but the quarterback battle is one matchup I'm looking at in this game. It's certainly not the only one, but for Dillon Gabriel, you can't have a one-sided affair on offense. That's just not going to work. If Ohio State knows what you're going to do on 3rd and 3 because you can't throw the ball and they know you're going to run it, or if they know you're going to throw it because you can't run it, you got problems. You're going to have problems. Even though the Oregon offensive line has played well, Ohio State's defense is really good. And I got a little sidetracked making my original point here, but even in that game in 2021, C.J. Verdell went crazy. He had 161 yards. 161 yards and a few touchdowns. Now, there were some big runs. They converted in key spots. But Verdell was really good running the ball. So too was Travis Dye. And Anthony Brown had one of his better games as a Duck. And that was against an Ohio State defense that was not nearly as good as the one that Oregon is facing on Saturday. So I continue to get more and more excited for the game. I do have a thought lingering in the back of my mind, like, the stakes aren't quite as high because of the 12-team playoff. Either team controls their own fate and does not need any help to get into the 12-team playoff, whoever for the loser of this game. Which, on the one hand, as a college football fan, makes me go, ugh, really? This is what I'm talking about. Sorry, had to edit out a sneeze right there. Been battling a cold this week, but it's okay. We'll be sharp, dialed in, ready to roll for the Oregon game on Saturday night. But the other side of me, the Oregon fan in me, says, oh, good thing there's a 12-team playoff. Oregon could lose this game, and it's okay. And make no mistake about it, that's not where my head is at. It's not Oregon doesn't need to win. No, it's okay. No, it'd be the biggest win of the Dan Lanning era. It would legitimize all the hopes that a lot of us, myself included, have had for this Oregon team coming into the year. That they can be a legitimate national title contender. That they are one of the 3 to 4 best teams in the entire country. That they are going to go into the Big Ten and immediately showcase the rest of the conference. Yeah, we might be the new kid on the block, but you should be worried about us now and in the long run. And I think that boils down to Dillon Gabriel. He's got to take care of the football, but he also has to have a game that isn't lighting the world on fire, but is certainly one where you look back and go, yeah, Dillon Gabriel played well. That's what you have to hear at the end of this game. You don't have to say Dillon Gabriel played the game of his life. Dillon Gabriel was incredible. You just need to be able to say, yeah, Dillon Gabriel played well. Dillon Gabriel was not the problem. You do that, and I think Oregon wins the football game. I've got my prediction locked in, 27-23. I have not wavered. Drop yours below in the YouTube comments. What are the 3 biggest keys to Oregon getting there? Do I think Oregon can win and will win? Yes. Am I 100% confident? Nope. This is a toss-up, coin flip, go either way sort of game, and Ohio State's really good. 3 things Oregon needs to do coming up next. First, this episode is brought to you by ZBiotics. Pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. This may apply to some of you, many of you, dare I say, going into the Ohio State game. How does it work? It's quite simple. Step 1, drink the pre-alcohol and make it your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. How easy is that? Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. That's what you need to do right now. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege. Use the code LockedOnCollege at checkout for 15% off. And do you want to bet this game? FanDuel is the place to do it. Ohio State favored by 3.5. Do you think that's ridiculous? FanDuel.com. Do you think you want to hedge your happiness? FanDuel.com. Do you think Oregon is a fraud and Ohio State's going to steamroll? FanDuel.com. It's all available over there. And NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place your first $5 bet. So do you want to bet college football or quite literally anything else? Check out FanDuel.com. Not one, not two, but three keys to Oregon beating Ohio State this week. Let's start with the rushing battle. Got to win the rushing battle. This isn't like last week against Michigan State where it's just stop the run, because I felt like Oregon had the ability to move the ball exclusively through the air if they needed to, or on the ground if they wanted to. But this first key to the game does go both ways. Oregon has to outrush Ohio State. And I've mentioned it all week on the show, even all summer long, that the 3 times Ohio State and Oregon have met since the 2009 season when they first met in the 2010 Rose Bowl game with Jeremiah Masoli and company, the team that runs for more yards wins the football game. So I think that carries over, not just because history has said that that's the case, but also because of the way that these teams play offense. Ohio State wants to set up everything with the run. One of the reasons I thought Will Howard to Ohio State made a lot of sense is that Howard at Kansas State was a capable quarterback. He was a high 50s, low 60s completion percentage guy. He's in the low 70s right now through the first 5 games in his Ohio State career. And the reason he has that is twofold. Number one, he has the best receiving core he's ever been surrounded by. Number two, he has a really good running game. And the best season of Will Howard's career came when he had Deuce Vaughn at Kansas State. They won the Big 12 championship, beat TCU, who were the national runners-up that season, to Georgia when they lost 65-7 a couple of seasons ago. So for Ohio State, I don't think they've had a game where they need Will Howard to throw the ball 35 to 40 times. If you tell me, hey, neither one of these teams can get going on the ground, man, you have to just go through the quarterbacks. That is advantage Oregon. I think Dillon Gabriel has not just shown that this season, but throughout the course of his career. I think he is more prepared to handle that in this spot than Will Howard is, who will make some good throws. His receivers will make phenomenal plays. But if Oregon's front, typically you say front 7, but really it's a front 6 with Oregon. If their front 6 takes away that rushing attack, for the defensive line wins at the point of attack, slows down, you're not going to completely eliminate Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. These guys are really, really good backs who can rotate out, keep each other fresh, and are just really outstanding football players. You limit them, you take away what they want to do fundamentally on offense, which is run the football and then set up play action and make the throws and reads simpler for Will Howard. And I think you make things a lot more complex, allow the defensive line to pin their ears back, which has been the biggest strength of this Oregon defense so far this year, are those front 4 guys. So winning the rushing battle. Because then offensively for Oregon, yeah, Dillon Gabriel can throw it 49 times like he did against Idaho. It's not preferred, especially against this Ohio State secondary, but we've seen the Oregon offense playing at its best when they run the football. Oregon State, UCLA, they ran it fine, but Oregon State, they ran the ball well, 7.5 yards a carry. Created a bunch of chunk plays in the first half last week against Michigan State. Game was never really close. Would have been an even more lopsided score if Gabriel had protected the ball. So, winning the rushing battle, definitely key number 1. Key number 2, speaking of Dillon Gabriel, protect the football. Protect the football. You can't give away scoring opportunities. You also can't create momentum plays for Ohio State that allow them to take the Autzen crowd out of it. Is there anything as deflating for a home crowd as an offensive turnover? I mean, maybe the other team scoring a touchdown. I'd still argue it's a turnover because there's all this excitement. You're ready to erupt. You're ready to have that roar. And then, oh, man. Can take the life out of it. Can't have that when you're at home. It's called home field advantage for a reason. Oregon has to be able to lean into it, and I think they have to be able to take points. In some of the big games, we know Dan Lanning's had a propensity to be aggressive, roll the dice. There's a time and a place for it. If Oregon goes down on their opening drive and they go inside the 15-yard line and then they get stopped on a 4th and 2 or a 4th and 1 or anything like that, kick the field goal, take points. I know that you're going to have to score touchdowns, but you're also going to have to, wait for it, score more points than the other team. So I would very much like for Lanning to have that willingness. But in order to even get to that situation, Gabriel has to protect the football. And if you make a mistake against this Ohio State defense, their offense was feeding off that last week against Iowa. They struggled in the first half against Iowa's defense. And I think Iowa and Oregon, pretty comparable defensively. I haven't done a deep dive on the Hawkeyes because Oregon doesn't play them this year. But at the very least, on paper, I'd say Oregon has at least as good of a defense as the Hawkeyes do. And Iowa was on the road. And Ohio State had 7 points at the half. And you know what flipped the tide? You know what gave their offense life? Good field position because of turnovers. They stripped Cade McNamara a couple times. I think they picked him off one more time. But they were disruptive up front. And Dillon Gabriel has to be able to protect the football. Because if you give this Ohio State offense, however well the defense is playing for Oregon, it can start, the momentum can swing. You can get a lot of different moving parts that work in Ohio State's favor. If you give him the ball suddenly on the Oregon 40-yard line because Gabriel got stripped or threw an interception and there was a big return, or if you take away a scoring chance. So, yeah, turnover is always important, but extra for Dillon Gabriel with the way he's been playing the last couple of weeks. And by the way, I know plenty of Oregon fans are worried, and I think your concerns are completely valid. Completely valid. Because we have seen 3 picks inside the 5 in the last 2 games. I think Dillon Gabriel figures it out. It's not about getting in the weight room and suddenly making your arm 5 times stronger than it was the week before. It's just about making smarter decisions, not forcing the issue. And if Will Stein and Dan Lanning get in his head in the best way and tell him, hey, we need you to be yourself. Don't try and be something that you're not. Don't force what isn't there. Take what is available to you. The Oregon offense will have enough success to win this football game. But Gabriel's got to give him that chance. So Dillon Gabriel protecting the football, that is key number 2. Everyone has to. Of course, it starts with a quarterback because he's the guy who's had the issue with that so far this year. Will Howard's been picked off 3 times. Forcing a turnover never hurts. Never hurts, especially to get the crowd back into it. But I think Gabriel protecting the football, that's key number 2. Key number 3, haven't gotten to this one yet this year, but this game feels like the most appropriate one because it should be the closest of the bunch. Special teams. Special teams. Oregon's got to avoid miscues and be solid on special teams. If you think back to the 5 losses, there have been 5 losses in the Dan Lanning era. 3 to Washington, 1 to Georgia, and 1 to Oregon State. The Georgia game, we don't need to go down that rabbit hole again. The 3rd Washington game, no special teams, massive miscues. But of the 5 losses, 2 of them have had special teams miscues, and I factor into that making a decision to leave points on the board. Last year against Washington, kick that field goal. If Camden Lewis is kicking for the win rather than for the tie, that's a different kind of pressure. Maybe he makes it. I don't know. It's still a lot of pressure either way, but at the very least, Oregon gets to overtime. So when you do have the opportunity, and if Lanning makes the decision to say, hey, let's kick a 32-yard field goal. Let's put some trust in Atticus Sappington, who has been solid. He's not kicking extra points this year, and, he's missed 2 of them. We'll all be holding our breath, is all I will say on that particular front. But when the opportunity presents itself, you have to be solid. But go back to another game that Dan Lanning lost. Oregon State in 2022. Special teams, disastrous in 2 ways. Number 1, drop a punt on the 1-yard line, give Oregon State a free touchdown. Number 2, poor kickoff coverage, have a face mask, give them the ball at the 30-something yard line immediately. Can't have those sorts of situations in a game like this. Ohio State had a big win against Michigan years ago. I don't think Ryan Day might have been the head coach. Might have still been Urban Meyer. Don't remember the exact year off the top of my head. But they had a block punt in the second half. And I just think about those sorts of games when it allows for one team to gain such a big advantage. I don't want to have to think or worry about special teams. If they're just a net neutral, I'll be happy with that. Oregon doesn't need to have explosive plays in the return game like they did against Boise State. They don't need to hit a 50-yarder necessarily. Well, maybe Andrew Boyle will have to at some point. I don't know. We'll see how the game plays out. But it doesn't have to be, oh my gosh, greatest special teams day ever. The special teams just can't be a hindrance towards Oregon's offense and defense working to outplay Ohio State, which is going to be tough. So those are 3 keys. win the rushing battle, protect the football, no miscues on special teams. Do you have your own keys to the game? By all means, drop in the YouTube comments. Let me know on X, formerly known as Twitter. One more thing on the line. Talked about it earlier this week a little bit, and a couple more mailbag questions coming up next. After we talk about Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. All right, handful of mailbag questions, which I'm always here for. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter, if you want priority access and all sorts of other perks. Go join the flock over at Subtext, link in the description below, wherever you listen to or watch the show to become a Locked On Ducks insider. Zach asks, longtime Duck fan from Illinois, listen to the show every day while I take my twin babies for a walk. Well, how great is that? Zach, his twins, and me. What a combination of individuals. So, question about this weekend. Do you think there's a realm of possibility that whomever wins between the Ducks and Buckeyes becomes the new number one in the AP poll? Thanks as always. Have a great day and go Ducks. So, touched on this a little earlier this week. Depends on what happens in Texas, Oklahoma. If Texas is unimpressive and Oregon is impressive, then yes. If Texas wins the way I think they will, then no. Should this be something for Duck fans to think about, be concerned about, worry about whether or not it matters? Not as much as it used to, because this isn't the BCS, the 4-team playoff. However, if Oregon wins this game and puts themselves in a position to maybe win the Big Ten or get a first-round bye, either one of which you have to win the Big Ten to do because you have to be a conference champion, I do think the perception of how this game gets received can matter in the long run. Not necessarily in whether Oregon, gets into the college football playoff, but whether Oregon gets a high enough seed if they have an at-large to host a playoff game. Because think about the prospect of playing a college football playoff game, which Oregon should expect to do this season. They should expect to play one. If Oregon doesn't get to the playoff, they don't have to win this game to get there, but it would certainly help, and it would seemingly all but lock up the fact that they'll be able to get there. If Oregon is playing a playoff game, do you want to play that game at Autzen Stadium, or do you want to go to somebody else's home environment? I'd rather play it at home. And so the way this game gets received definitely matters. In the short term, not as much. In the long run, whether it's a win or a loss for Oregon, just like let's say Oregon loses the game 31-27. It's close, it's competitive, it comes down to a fourth down, or Oregon needing a stop to get the ball back, they don't get it, and Ohio State kneels out the clock, just hypothetically. If that takes place, I will be paying attention to how far Oregon drops. Because though the AP poll and the College Football Playoff Committee are not one and the same, their rankings rarely have significant differences. Because the people that are in the College Football Playoff Selection Committee room oftentimes think pretty similarly to those that construct the voting procedures for the AP poll. So, yeah, Oregon could be number one. I mean, if you go out and beat Ohio State by 17 to 20 points, that's going to be more impressive than Texas beating Oklahoma, who I don't actually think is that good of a football team this year. They're ranked 18th, but don't let that fool you. Texas, I think, steamrolls in that game. But if Texas plays them tight and Oregon wins by 10 to 14, yeah, I think there's a very real world where Oregon's the number one team in the country. Will it matter a ton? Not in the short term. In the long run, maybe. This question from Balin. All right, pod question instead of golf. He'd asked me a golf question earlier, which I'm totally here for. I've played golf for 12 years. I'm a decent enough player to give other people help with their swings or advice on anything. I had someone on Instagram asking me about that the other day. So if you want to ask me a golf question, I'm here for it. Last year, most people left the first Washington game feeling like it was one of the best football games they'd ever watched despite the loss. Fact check true. Buy or sell. Oregon fans will leave this game feeling like it's the best football game they've ever watched, as long as we don't lose by more than a score if we are to lose. Hard to replicate last year because part of what went into making last season's game against Washington so exhilarating, but then massively disappointing and just emotionally crushing to lose. The stakes of that game were twofold. Number one, 4-team playoff, not a 12-team. So Oregon, from that point going forward, did not control their own fate to get into the college football playoff. Number two, it was Washington. I know Oregon-Ohio State has the possibility of becoming a rivalry. It is not at this point in time. They've played 3 times in the last 15 years. That's just not at that level. It can become that because they're going to have recruiting battles, they're going to have on-field battles and playoff battles and all that sort of stuff. And this might not be the only time Oregon and Ohio State play this season. But to say that this game could replicate the emotions of last year in Seattle, no, I don't agree. Because last year I was anxiously awaiting every day the moments leading up to that football game. This week, I'm excited about it. Don't get me wrong. I'm stoked. It's a huge opportunity for Oregon. It's great. A loss is not as crushing as a win, as much as a win is beneficial to Oregon. And last year, that wasn't the case. So, could end up being a great football game. I think it's going to be fun. I've got Oregon winning 27-23. I think it is going to be a really, really good game to watch. But will it get to last year's Oregon-Washington game? No, I don't think so. Lastly here, Dragon Forge's studio animations. Whatever it does for you, man. Question, what exactly is it about this team so far this season that makes you so confident in their ability to compete for a natty at this moment? I personally don't see it right now, and I hope that I am wrong moving forward. I would love to dine on some crow, but I don't see that on the menu right now. Top-notch analogy there. For those of you that don't know, the expression eating crow, I don't know where it comes from. I'm sure somebody in the comments or a Locked On Ducks insider will tell me. It's something that happens. I've had to do it many a times because I make college football picks every week over on Locked On College Football, which you should make your second listen of the day. Eating crow is what has to happen when you're wrong. You're like, yeah, I didn't see it coming. I was wrong there. Heck, I might have to eat some on the show. Thought Oregon would win. They ended up losing, especially if Oregon loses by double digits. But I don't think that'll happen. I think Oregon finds a way to get it done, especially at home. Tough place to win. To answer your question, my confidence is twofold. Number one, the defensive line. I don't know how much better the defensive line could have played this season. I really don't. Like, Ashton Genty went crazy. The long runs that he broke off, don't think they were as much. A couple were on the D-line, but mostly his yards came on bad run fits or missed tackles at the second level, which is kind of just what that guy does as he's running his way close to a Heisman Trophy caliber season because he's just that good. But the defensive line, and when I think it is the reason, and that's the answer to your question, Dan Lanning came over from Georgia, where he'd coordinated a couple of national championships. Incredibly impressive. Why was Georgia's defense so good over there? Defensive line. So for Lanning's defense, which he brought over from Athens, to be at its best, you have to be able to get production from your front four and alter quarterbacks without blitzing. And Oregon has done that consistently this season. Consistently. The depth, the talent, the experience, I love the blend of that unit. So that's where it starts. Secondly, the myriad of weapons that Oregon has can't get much better. Last 2 seasons, best 2-year run of wide receivers in Oregon history in my lifetime. I don't know that there's a stretch where you could argue it's been stronger. With this many 1,000-yard receivers, NFL caliber guys, it's just been really good. You add a veteran quarterback to that who I know is incredibly capable and who I think fixes his turnover problem and plays better this week. Yeah, those would be the fundamental reasons. I can go on further, but I start with the defense. That defensive line causes havoc. Defense travels everywhere you go, and there's experience and talent all over the offensive side of the ball. That's where my confidence comes from. Where does your confidence come from? Let me know in the comments below. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.